Hello, and welcome to Social Workers Rise, where we inspire social workers to connect, expand their knowledge, and change more lives than they ever thought possible. We will talk everything social work on every level from micro to macro. We are going to hear stories of social workers who are doing big things, learn new skills, and most importantly, give you actionable steps to make a difference today. Let's go. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Social Workers Rise. It is your host, Catherine here. We have a special treat for you today. We're talking with Sara Diaz, LCSW. She's a dedicated first-generation life and transition coach and workshop facilitator. She serves as the visionary founder and chief madrina at the First Gen Madrina LLC. Sara's unwavering commitment revolves around supporting first-generation individuals and fostering awareness about mental health within the community. Her diverse background includes child welfare, higher education, the nonprofit sector, and the podcasting community. She holds a master's degree in social work from Rutgers University and is a licensed clinical social worker. Definitely go over and check out her podcast, The First Gen Madrina. Welcome to the podcast, Sara. How are you doing today?
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. It's really an honor.
Yeah, well, the honor is all mine. I'm really excited to talk with you because we both are first gens. And I know that a lot of the social workers who listen to the podcast are also first gen. So we're just navigating this new world of being first gen in college, first generation social workers. A lot of us don't know other social workers. And so there's some unique challenges that come with that, including imposter syndrome, which I know a lot of people struggle with. So if this is you, my friend, you are in the right place. Sara is going to help us out today.
Yes. So I'm so excited to get into that. It's actually one of my favorite topics.
Awesome. Tell us a little bit about you and what you do.
So before I start, again, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak on this platform. I know this podcast very well, so I am excited to be here. But hello to my Social Workers Rise family. My name is Sara Diaz, and as it mentioned in my bio, I am a first-generation Cuban American, so the first in my family to be born in the United States, and also the first to graduate college, which was a pretty big deal in my family. Eventually, I went on to get my master's degree, as you mentioned, in social work, and eventually I became a licensed clinical social worker. As I navigated, though, like the traditional social work field, I started to realize that I wanted to do a lot more than what I originally intended to do. I think that's something that's common for first-gen folks and also for social workers. So after being heavily involved in the field of child welfare and the nonprofit sector, I started to navigate or transition into the world of higher ed, because I really found my passion to be working with the first generation community, especially college students. And ultimately what I wanted was to be that person that I wish I had when I was navigating college. That person that I can go to and ask, like, where do I go to, for help with this? Where do I access these resources? And that's ultimately what I became. So I still consider myself to be a social worker, but a little bit in the non-traditional sense.
That's amazing. I love that. Let's break it down. When we say first gen, what exactly are we talking about? Because I feel like sometimes people feel excluded from this or included, or, just for the sake of our conversation today, how do you define first generation?
So there's actually not one universal definition for first gen, which can get very confusing. There are many nuances. But let's say we're talking about first gen college students, right? So it could be dependent on the context that you're speaking about. So, as a first gen college student, the federal definition is that you are the first in your family to obtain a 4-year college degree. Now, this can also be dependent on the college and the university that you attend. So I always tell students to check your college or university definition so that you see if the program and services apply to you. Now, I consider first gen to be a little bit more fluid, and I'm very open to different definitions. I do support a lot of college students, so I go off of the federal definition, but also I said in my bio or in my intro that I'm a first gen Cuban American. So I also consider myself to be first gen because I was the first to be born in this country. So there are a lot of nuances. I have met a lot of people that I think in our conversation, they were the first to find out that they were a first gen. I actually met someone who was 60 years old who, by my definition, identified himself as a first gen. And he was very proud of that, but very sad that he didn't know it sooner so that he would have been connected to resources. So I love bringing more awareness to our community and really providing more tools and education.
Yes, definitely. And there can be first gen business owners, first gen social workers, first gen, I'd say first gen podcasters.
Yeah. Especially social workers, because it is something new. It is something that's the first, and oftentimes we come from cultures where mental health is still very stigmatized. So we are the first to embark on this new journey because it's not as accepted by our families.
For sure. And by society, it's not understood, and it can even be looked down upon. I've heard, or I've had people in my own life say, why would you want to be a social worker and be messing up people's families and taking kids from their homes? And I'm just, like hand plant. I'm like, no, that's not what we do. So people just don't understand. And especially if you're coming from another or the type of culture where they want prestige in their family, a lot of times social work I would not define social work as prestigious at all. You're getting in there in the communities, you're out in the streets, you're in people's homes. It's not a prestigious line of work. So that in itself, if your family is not for you doing this line of work, can be really, really challenging.
Yeah, I think that's an overall narrative of what we see with social workers, even non-first gens. I don't know if you ever heard this, but when I was going to school, I always heard that phrase, "We're in it for the outcome, not the income," and that's pretty relevant for us. But yeah, social work has always been at the forefront of all the work that I do, and I can't imagine being anything else.
Okay, Sarah, this is a test. We might have to end this interview soon. Do you agree with that statement?
No, I don't.
Oh, thank God.
No. Honestly, I think it was something that if I look back, I think it set a lot of us up for failure. And I have very strong views about this. I think schools need to do better at getting rid of that narrative. And it starts with paying social work interns. Like, that is a huge deal, because when you see that you have the opportunities to be paid, you're setting up the agencies, the organizations that the social work students will be starting to work in once they graduate, and you start to change that narrative around. And I think that's why I left the traditional social work realm, because I felt like there was so much more out there for me. And becoming an entrepreneur, I get to change that narrative, and now I get to rewrite it and say, no, we deserve just as much as anybody that income piece, because we're doing such amazing work. And I really think it starts in higher ed.
Yeah, definitely. I heard that message over and over again. And what do you think about that particular message, for example, playing into this imposter syndrome that we experience? Because I'm thinking back to my internship days where I would show up and say, oh, I'm just the intern. I'm just this, I'm just the social worker. So let's talk a little bit about that. What is imposter syndrome?
So first of all, I'm going to give credit where credit is due, and I have an amazing teacher and mentor named Dr. Nicole Pulliam out of Monmouth University in New Jersey, who is an imposter syndrome expert and has taught me everything that I need to know. And now I get to teach you guys because it's actually very interesting. So, fun fact, imposter syndrome was never imposter syndrome. It actually was imposter phenomenon. And it was coined back in the late 1970s by two psychologists, Dr. Pauline Clance and Dr. Suzanne Imes. And they were studying high achieving women who were experiencing what they called imposter phenomenon. And phenomenon implies something that is not easily explained, something that's still being researched, and somehow down the line, somebody changed it to syndrome. Now, I have a problem with syndrome because syndrome to me is toxic and allows us to internalize these feelings that actually have nothing to do with us. Imposter syndrome is something that is, I would say, created by society. It's by the messages that we're receiving from the media. And it's something that's so important for us to be able to recognize those feelings. And what they are is those weird feelings sometimes that we get, like what you were just describing, Catherine, of like, I'm just an intern, I don't know anything, or I'm an imposter, I'm not meant to be here, I'm not meant to be in this space. And most of the time, the crazy part is that we are those high achieving people. So we were brought there for a reason. We're in these spaces for a reason, and we still have that internal dialogue that challenges that. And that's why imposter syndrome to me is so important to talk about, because it doesn't only happen in high achieving women. And now the best part of all of this is that Dr. Nicole Pulliam, my mentor, is now doing research on how imposter syndrome or imposter phenomenon is relevant for first gens and relevant for women of color.
I love that. And I just love what you said about having it be, specific, that it's not specifically with women, because I think that when I think of imposter phenomenon, I do think a lot about women. You're right about it coming from society telling us that as women, we're just never enough. We're never going to be a man. We're never going to measure up. We always have to prove ourselves. And coming into a new role straight out of grad school, I mean, a lot of us have freaking master's degrees. We're the first in our family to get this. And so we're coming into spaces where we have to be able to, lift our heads up and put our shoulders back and say, yes, I'm here. I don't have all the answers. And that's okay, because I can figure it out too.
Yes, and this is something that I experienced a lot when I transitioned to being a business owner. And I remembered saying to myself, Sarah, you don't know the first thing about running a business. You're a social worker. So I would put myself down and say, this is what you're supposed to be doing. This is the path you're supposed to follow. You're not meant to do anything else. And it was very challenging. It kept me from starting my business for a long time.
But it's ironic because when you say, I'm a social worker, I can't do this, that just doesn't even make sense in my mind, because social workers, the way that I think about them is we're problem solvers, we're networkers. We know how to do assessments of what the needs are and how to solve those needs, which is exactly what business owners do. And going into any new environment, you're not going to have all the answers, but you have the skills to figure it out. You have people that can help you. You have resources, especially now. We have so many resources to figure it out, but there's still this little nagging voice in our head. I always use the analogy of an annoying neighbor. She is constantly there, like, knock, 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 knock. Hey, remember, you haven't done this before. And I had a friend who blah, 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 and they failed. And with all of these horror stories about why we can't do it, or how maybe our colleagues or our clients are going to figure out, oh my gosh, they're going to figure out I don't know everything, and it's going to be terrible.
That's exactly it. That's exactly the definition of imposter phenomenon. And I experienced the same thing until I realized those transferable skills that you were just talking about. All those transferable skills that I've had throughout my education and my experience was ultimately what I needed to pivot into this new adventure. I just didn't give myself the allowance to do it because I kept listening to that imposter syndrome. So recognize that you do have these transferable skills that you can take with you to, to any job. And maybe I'm biased, but I think social workers probably have the highest number of transferable skills of all careers to shut down imposter syndrome and really be able to make those pivots.
For sure. Hey, it's Catherine here. I hope you are enjoying this episode. We're going to take a quick break to listen to these ads from our sponsors. The next time you need continuing education units, I highly recommend the Therapist Development Center. When I started this podcast, I reached out to the founder, Amanda Rowan, to see if she was interested in being a sponsor. And she jumped at the chance to support her fellow social worker. TDC has helped more than 100,000 social workers pass their licensing exam, including myself. I love that TDC CE courses are engaging and relevant. Amanda and her experts give us clear and practical clinical skills that we can immediately apply to our work. Some of my favorites are the Edge of Life Suicide Prevention course, where Amanda shares her personal experiences, and their They Did What? Law and Ethics course that looks at real cases where therapists face formal disciplinary actions. They also have a great telehealth course. We are legally required to take continuing education to increase our competence, and most other courses out there don't actually teach the material in a way that we can learn it, but TDC does. You can also check out the links in the show notes. So you talked about how you have you have a lot of knowledge about imposter syndrome, so you know exactly what it is.
Mm-hmm.
You yourself experienced it. So what did you do to overcome it? You kind of hinted at it a little bit, but I really want to know, what is it that you did, because we need to know, Sara.
So, the first piece of advice that I give to anyone that wants to start thinking about imposter syndrome is don't set yourself up for failure and think that you can overcome imposter syndrome. This may be my humble opinion, but I don't think we can ever 100% overcome imposter syndrome. We may be able to overcome one instance of imposter syndrome, but then another one might come up. So for me, it's important to teach others, learn how to manage imposter syndrome. Learn how to recognize it when it comes up, how you need to reframe things in your mind and be able to move forward. But I think once I released that fear or that knowledge of I need to overcome it and was putting so much pressure on myself, that is when I started to believe, oh, okay, maybe this is something that I can overcome, but I can learn how to manage it. So that is probably the biggest pieces of advice that I can give. And also look into what it is that's causing you imposter syndrome, because for us first gens, and I can talk to you about my community, the Latinx community, for me it was very important to see representation. And as you mentioned in the beginning, there are not enough social workers out there, and there's definitely not enough Latinx social workers or even Latinx business owners. So once I started to find my tribe and find my community, that imposter syndrome slowly started to go down, because I finally felt like, oh, I found my people. This is what I want to aspire to be. So it's very important to find someone that you align with, find that representation. That's the ultimate advice I can give.
That's amazing. So, one, find your community, find your tribe, and also learn how to manage it and know that it's never really going to go away, that it's always going to be there. And that seems normal, especially when you are stretching your boundaries, when you're learning something new. You're never going to learn or know everything that you need to know. That's just how life works, right? So even if you are, so there's a lot of new graduates coming out of school. What advice would you have for them if they're experiencing imposter syndrome?
I would say to keep an open mind. I had a lot of kind of tunnel vision, as I call it, when I graduated, that I was only going to do one certain thing. Once I started to open myself up to all the possibilities, that's where the imposter syndrome is going to go down. Because then you're going to give yourself, or you're going to allow yourself the permission to do what it is that you truly love to do. And I don't think there truly is a career that's more diverse and open than social work. There's so many opportunities, there's so many avenues that you can take. So keep an open mind, because what I thought I wanted to do when I graduated was not the same a year post grad, and is definitely not the same right now. So keep an open mind and allow yourself to enter into these, new opportunities.
Yes. And I would also add, you want to make sure that you know what you're bringing to the table. That's going to reduce your imposter syndrome as well.
Yes.
Because when we're looking at these job descriptions, we say, oh my gosh, I don't meet all of these requirements, so I'm just not even going to try to apply. And we hold ourselves back. But when you are applying for jobs, preparing for your interviews, what I would do is I would make a list of everything that I brought to the table, everything that I could do, right? My experiences, the populations that I worked with, any kind of interventions that I was familiar with. I would write down all the courses that I took, all of the master's levels and bachelor level courses that I have experience with. I mean, that in itself, like seeing that whole list of your transcripts will boost your confidence tenfold. So just being able to communicate, I haven't done all of these things, but here's a long list of the things that I have done and what I am able to bring to your organization. And that's what really helped me be able to know, what it is that I'm strong in and that anybody can do.
Yeah, so I actually had a mentor when I was first starting out that told me to keep, I don't remember what she called it. It was like a success cheat sheet. So it was like a document that you keep on your computer. You have access to it. And as you gain experience, you start adding on to it all that you have accomplished. If you created a new program, or if you helped to facilitate a group or an individual session, whatever it is, add it to that success cheat sheet, so that when you're ready to find a new job, when you're interviewing, you have all of that already done and you have it all listed out for you. So that's some good advice too.
I love this success cheat sheet. I'm all about the cheat sheets. They're amazing.
Yeah.
So Sara, tell us about your business and a little bit about why you started it.
Yes, so my business is called The First Gen Madrina, and Madrina means godmother in Spanish. So I started it because I began to do a lot of volunteer work while I was working in child welfare, and it was working with first generation college students, ones that have recently immigrated to this country or ones that were children of immigrants. And we were helping to create a leadership development program for them so that they felt prepared, for life after graduation. And once I started building relationships with these students and gaining their trust, a lot of them would come up to me and would say, Sara, I need support. I know I'm struggling with my mental health, but the counseling centers on campus are at capacity. I can't talk to my family about this. They don't believe that mental health is a thing. Where do I go? Where do I find these resources? They're not accessible or affordable to us. And that made me realize that there's a huge gap and a huge need, especially to support first-gen college students. And with that, I started to build programming. I built mentorship programs for colleges and universities because one of the biggest things that we face is a lack of sense of belonging. And that's also something that can contribute to imposter syndrome. I started to create these workshops to talk to students about, hey, this is how you manage burnout. This is how you create a self-care plan. This is how you recognize the mental health, barriers within our communities. And that slowly trickled into the college programming side of my business. And then along with that, I started to realize that you don't stop being a first gen when you graduate college. You enter into what I call a lifetime of first. So as you're just mentioning, the first to become an entrepreneur, the first to move out of their home state, the first to enter a stigmatized career like us, there's a need to support first gen professionals as well. So with that, I transitioned to what I call a life and transition coach, using my knowledge and my background in social work and mental health to figure out the best ways to help others pivot with purpose, finding that job that aligns with their vision, and also being able to get rid of those limiting beliefs, shift that mindset, get overcome all these barriers that are placed in us, and of course, managing imposter syndrome. So that's the coaching side of my business, and honestly, I have never felt more aligned to my work as I do now. And I really hope to be that godmother figure for our community who may not have any, direction or might not know where to turn to. And they know that they can have someone that's in their corner that can say, hey, I'm going to walk you through this. So that's what I've been able to accomplish with my business.
Yes,
And
Sarah, I
it's
am
just getting
so
started.
excited for
I'm
you
so
too. It
excited
sounds
for
like
what's
you're
to
already
come.
doing a lot of really powerful work in the community. I'm wondering, because I know our listeners are going to want to know, for being an entrepreneur and being a coach, do you feel like you need an LCSW to do that, or that it has contributed to your success?
So you don't need an LCSW. I actually know a lot of coaches out there that have transitioned from completely different careers. But again, I'm going to be biased and I'm going to say that no one is going to be a better coach than someone that has a background in social work, especially in clinical social work, because there's so much that comes up for clients that they don't necessarily know where it's coming from. And having this background in clinical social work, especially, is so helpful to be able to support clients. And I still say at the end of the day, if you want to have a therapist while you're working with me, our work is complementary because I'm technically not treating this as a therapy session. It's more of a coaching session. But I think we are the best type of social workers. I don't think I need a life coach certification. I have all of that in my master's and in my licensure. So if there are any social workers that are interested in being coaches, I think honestly
Yes,
that we
yes,
stand out
definitely.
from
And
the
you
rest
mentioned a lot
because
of
of the
services. I
background
just
that
want
we
to be really
have.
crystal clear for the listeners. What services do you offer?
Okay, so if you are an administrator working in higher ed, I can support you by putting together workshops for college students on those topics that I mentioned, right? Burnout, self care, imposter syndrome, anything that has to do with that realm to support college students. You can hire me to come in and to present those workshops for them. Now, on the other side of the business, if you are a first gen individual or professional that is looking to manage or looking to get past a certain life challenge or transition in your life, that's something that we can do through the life and transition coaching. So I have a structured program based on my experiences. So I didn't talk about this, but I left my full time job to become an entrepreneur the
Oh,
same year that I also moved out of my home state. So doing those two, yeah, making those two major pivots in my life has taught me a lot about the importance of embracing change, the importance of tuning out the external noise, of being that support and giving that allowance to the first gen community and saying, hey, you can do the thing that makes you scared. You can do that thing that you thought you weren't able to do for such a long time. And
definitely.
that's
I
really what I
love it,
provide in
Sarah.
the
So,
coaching work
if
that I
you are
do.
feeling Sarah and you want to hear more about what she has to say and access her podcast or her services, find her podcast, The First Gen Madrina, can be found on Spotify, our iHeartRadio, and Apple Podcasts. Where else can they find you or connect with you if they're interested in your services?
Yeah, so I am pretty much everywhere under the First Gen Madrina, and Madrina is Madrina. So my website is thefirstgenmadrina.com, and you can find me on Instagram at the First Gen Madrina also. And I love connecting with fellow First Gen members and especially social workers because they will always have a place near and dear to my heart. So please
Awesome.
feel free
Thank
to
you so
reach
much,
out and
Sara,
send me a
and I'll talk
message
to
on
you next
Instagram. I love
week,
getting them.
listener. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Social Workers Rise. If you love this episode, be sure to subscribe and text this episode to a friend. If you want more, there are a few ways we can get to know each other and work together. First, definitely subscribe to the Friday resource email list. The link is in the show notes. And that's where you can learn more about the courses I offer, including Clinical Essentials for the Future Therapist and the Pulse Basics for Medical Social Workers. I'll also be sending out occasional tips and resources and other happenings within the social work industry. And for all your clinical supervision needs, be sure to visit risedirectory.com. This is a national directory of clinical supervisors for social workers, and we also provide free resources that you can use within your own clinical supervision. Lastly, if you have more individualized needs, I do offer coaching, individual consultations, and am available for public speaking engagements for social workers and change makers. Lastly, the boring legal stuff, but very important. The information in this podcast is not meant to be a supplement for therapy, professional advice, or clinical supervision. This content is provided as is solely for informational purposes. It is not legal, health, or safety advice. I am not advising you as a therapist. Organizations should engage their own experts to ensure any adopted measures are compliant with applicable laws and standards in their jurisdictions. The opinions expressed by individuals or organizations are their own and do not reflect the views or opinions of Social Workers Rise or Catherine Moore. References to specific products or organizations do not constitute any endorsement or recommendations by Social Workers Rise.